Most men misunderstand withdrawal because they mistake it for weakness, avoidance, or emotional defeat. Carl Jung viewed it completely differently. For Jung, withdrawal wasn't retreat, it was a redirection of psychic energy. And that difference matters far more than most men realize. When a man pulls back intentionally, something subtle but powerful begins to shift. The world around him doesn't just lose access to his attention, it loses access to the emotional labor he'd been quietly providing. Conversations cool down. Relationships feel unsettled. Expectations fall apart, not because he suddenly became harsh, but because he stopped carrying what others refused to hold themselves. Jung understood that men are conditioned early to externalize their inner life. They project meaning, purpose, validation, and emotional grounding onto women, institutions, work, or systems of approval. Over time, that projection turns into dependence. The man stops experiencing his own inner world directly. He experiences it through reaction, through response, through whether he is needed, wanted, or affirmed. Withdrawal breaks this loop. When a man stops reacting, people feel it long before they can explain it. The calls become awkward. The tests increase. The emotional climate shifts. Jung would say this happens because libido, psychic energy, has been pulled back from the object and returned to the subject, and the systems stabilized by that energy begin to shake. This is the moment most men panic. They mistake the discomfort of withdrawal as a sign something is wrong. Jung would argue the opposite. That discomfort is evidence that the psyche is reorganizing, that projections are collapsing, that illusions are losing their hold. Most men don't stay in this stage long enough to understand. They rush to restore balance. They explain themselves, reassure everyone, and slip back into the familiar dynamic just to stop the tension, and in doing so, they abandon the transformation. Jung warned that anything you refuse to confront within yourself will reappear outside of you as fate. When a man refuses to withdraw, refuses to sit alone with his own psyche, he condemns himself to repeat the same emotional patterns with different people, different relationships, different environments. The faces change, but the outcomes don't. Withdrawal is not silence meant as punishment. It's silence meant for truth. It exposes where your energy was being drained. It shows who relied on your presence to avoid facing themselves. And, most uncomfortably, it reveals how much of your identity was built through reaction rather than authorship. This is why withdrawal feels dangerous. You are no longer mirrored. You are no longer reflected back to yourself through another person's desire, approval, or resistance. Jung called this the confrontation with the self, and he was very clear that most men try to escape it. But when a man stays withdrawn long enough, something irreversible begins. He stops seeking emotional permission to exist. His attention becomes selective. His presence becomes heavier without becoming louder. People sense the shift even if they can't articulate it. They feel less in control around him because control relies on predictability, and withdrawal destroys predictability at the core. What unsettles people is not the absence itself, but the sudden loss of access. Jung understood that many relationships are not sustained by love or loyalty alone, but by unspoken emotional contracts. Roles get assigned quietly. One person stabilizes, the other reacts. One absorbs tension, the other releases it. When a man withdraws, he breaks this contract without announcing anything, and that is why the reactions are so intense. People start to feel exposed. They are forced to hold emotions they previously outsourced. They lose the predictable surface they relied on to project onto. Jung described projection as the psyche's most efficient defense mechanism. We take what we cannot handle in ourselves and place it onto others so we can interact with it safely at a distance. When a man withdraws, he removes himself as the projection screen, and when the screen disappears, the projected image collapses inward. This is why withdrawal is often met with confusion, irritation, or subtle hostility rather than understanding. It disrupts the emotional economy of the relationship. The man is no longer playing the role that kept others comfortable. He's no longer absorbing anxiety, soothing insecurity, or translating emotional chaos into something manageable. And when that stabilizing function disappears, people don't actually feel abandoned. They feel destabilized. Jung would say this is when the other person's shadow emerges. The irritation they feel is rarely about him. It's about what his absence forces them to face. Their dependence, their entitlement, their unexamined hunger for reassurance. His withdrawal becomes a mirror they never asked to look into. For the man himself, this stage is dangerous in another sense. Withdrawal creates silence, and silence amplifies whatever he has been avoiding. Old insecurities rise. Questions about worth, meaning, and identity appear with no distraction. Jung warned that withdrawal without inner work becomes isolation, and isolation without meaning leads to regression. This is where many men fail. They treat withdrawal as an endpoint instead of a passage. But when he stays conscious through it, something starts to shift. He notices how often his presence was used as emotional currency, how his attention was traded for affirmation, how his effort was mistaken for value. These realizations are painful because they dissolve the heroic narratives men tell themselves about sacrifice, loyalty, and love. Jung was unsentimental about this. He believed maturity requires letting go of comforting illusions. As withdrawal continues, the man's psychic energy rearranges. Libido returns inward. Creativity rises. Focus tightens. Not because life suddenly becomes simple, but because his energy is no longer scattered across countless external demands. He becomes less reactive, not due to discipline, but because he no longer feels interested in unnecessary emotional labor. This distinction matters. Power that comes from suppression is fragile. People start to feel this shift, even if they don't have the words for it. He becomes harder to read, less eager, less available for emotional negotiation. His presence, when offered, carries weight because it is no longer guaranteed. Jung observed that what is scarce becomes symbolically powerful, not due to manipulation, but because scarcity forces consciousness. People notice what can disappear. Many misinterpret this as arrogance. In truth, it's individuation unfolding. The man stops defining himself by how well he fits into someone else's psychological needs. He starts defining himself from within, and that reorients every connection around him. Modern men rarely hear this truth. Psychological growth doesn't make you universally liked. It makes you distinct, and distinction always produces tension. When a man withdraws and continues inward, he separates himself from the collective emotional rhythm around him. This separation is psychological before it's social, which is why it hits so deeply. Jung called it individuation, not self-esteem, not self-improvement, the painful movement from being a function of the group to becoming a whole individual. The individuated man no longer exists just to regulate others' emotions. He is no longer a reflection of anyone's expectations. Because of this, he becomes harder to categorize. People react predictably. Some feel magnetized by the depth and coherence they sense. Others feel threatened or dismissed without him dismissing them. Jung noted this reaction isn't about morality. It's about projection. The withdrawing man becomes a clear, silent surface again, but this time with intention. And onto that surface, people project their unresolved fears. This is why some accuse him of being cold, arrogant, or distant. These accusations are rarely accurate descriptions. They are confessions. They reveal the discomfort of facing someone who no longer over-explains, overgives, or over-adjusts. Someone who doesn't rush to fill silence removes others' emotional leverage. Jung warned that individuation disrupts unconscious hierarchies. Every group has invisible roles: who reassures, who adapts, who absorbs, who leads emotionally. Withdrawal removes a man from his role without asking permission. When that happens, the group must reorganize. Some resist, some adjust, some drift away. This is why withdrawal often brings loss, not as punishment, but as consequence. Relationships sustained by projection rather than genuine wholeness can't survive individuation. Jung believed this was necessary. Whatever falls away was never aligned with the self. It was aligned with a persona. For the man, this stage introduces a new temptation: to use withdrawal as a weapon. Jung warned against this. Manipulative withdrawal is still dependence. It's still controlled by others. Real withdrawal is quiet, unperformed, uninterested in outcomes. It is inhabited, not displayed. As he continues inward, something settles inside him. He stops needing to be understood. He no longer treats disagreement as danger. His sense of self grows non-negotiable because it isn't outsourced anymore. Jung called this the emergence of inner authority, not dominance over others, but alignment with oneself. This is when the man stops asking whether withdrawal is working. That question belongs to the old pattern. He stops measuring his behavior by reaction. He measures it by coherence, by whether his choices feel internally aligned instead of externally rewarded. And this is what truly changes everything. Because once he reaches this point, he's not withdrawing from others. He's standing with himself. From this place, every interaction becomes a choice rather than a compulsion. The final resistance a man faces during withdrawal is not social loss. It's existential fear. The fear that without constant engagement, without being needed or reacted to, he will disappear, become irrelevant, become alone. Jung understood this fear well. He believed it was the last illusion blocking the path to individuation. Many men equate connection with existence. If they're not desired, consulted, or pursued, they feel like they're fading. This isn't weakness. It's conditioning. From early life, men are taught to measure worth through usefulness and response. Withdrawal disrupts that entire measuring system. And when the metrics fall apart, the man faces the hardest question: who am I when no one is pulling on me? Jung would say this is where the true self starts to appear. Loneliness in withdrawal is often misunderstood. It's not the absence of people that hurts. It's the absence of distraction. With no noise to cover it, the psyche speaks clearly. Regrets surface. Unlived instincts demand acknowledgement. Suppressed desires knock at the door. Jung insisted that this confrontation is unavoidable for any man wanting to become whole. This is why so many return too early. They confuse discomfort with danger. They run back into noise, relationships, roles that dilute awareness. And the cycle repeats. The same dynamics, the same frustrations, the same quiet dissatisfaction. But the man who stays long enough experiences something unexpected. The fear of invisibility dissolves, not because attention returns, but because attention stops being the metric. He realizes relevance was never granted by others, it was postponed by dependence. His presence stops begging for confirmation. It develops its own gravity. People start responding differently. Some feel drawn, sensing depth they can't explain. Others feel indifferent, and it no longer threatens him. He no longer shapes his life around reaction. Jung believed this was the sign of maturity, the ability to stand inwardly without collapsing outward. This doesn't make the man isolated. It makes his connections precise. He stops overextending. He stops doing emotional labor just to be accepted. He chooses where his energy goes, and that choice transforms every interaction. Conversations become cleaner. Boundaries become effortless. Silence becomes meaningful instead of awkward. At this point, withdrawal isn't something he does. It's something he has integrated. He can engage without losing himself. He can detach without hostility. He can walk away without resentment. Jung would say he has stopped living from the persona and started living from the self. And this is why everything changes. Not because others finally behave better, not because life gets easier, but because he is no longer controlled by unconscious need. He is no longer chasing stability through others. He is standing in alignment with himself, and the world must now adjust. If this resonated with you, you're already sensing the shift. Support the work by liking the video, sharing it with someone who needs it, and subscribing for deeper psychological breakdowns like this. The link in the description keeps the channel alive. Withdrawal is not disappearance, it is emergence.